Washington State University. What you're about to see today is something that my students came up with over the last 2 weeks. So we literally started the first class on January 9th. And I think one of the classes was actually on holiday, so we literally just had 3 classes. So it's amazing how much work they pumped out. But of course, we did this kind of remotely. We talk to people, we write documents. So everything we present today really needs to be field verified and also, reconsider based on community input. So it's just one way for us to spark the conversations. There's definitely not a definitive design proposal we're putting out there. So today, the purpose of this presentation is to get you to look at different best practices and precedents around the world and how they might be able to be translated into solutions on the ground. And then during the second hour, we're going to have a design game where you can all propose ideas and work together as teams. And then during the third hour, we're going to have you present what you come up with. So I'm going to briefly introduce the students. Spencer is going to begin the presentation by talking about sea level rise and coastal flooding and possible solutions. And then Nathan is going to go to the solutions with a little bit more variations in terms of energy production. And the next person will be Philip. Philip is going to look at solutions that will address both coastal flooding and inland flooding in terms of creating more spaces for water retention. And then he's also going to be talking about how we treat the different sources of water to begin to think about making the Green Benefit District an eco-district from a net zero water reuse standpoint. And next, we're going to be moving inland, further up, thinking about the right-of-ways, the kinds of interventions that can go into these really wide right-of-ways to help us manage water quantity and quality. And then Victor will, really spice it up a bit and thinking about wild solutions like introducing canals, thinking about Venice and Amsterdam type of environment. And then we'll wrap up with Colin, who's going to take us back down from the hill to the bay to think about the 2 creek discharge points and how the compounding effect of creek flooding and coastal flooding might be able to be mitigated with some of the strategies that we propose. All right, with that, I'm going to pass it to Spencer.
Hello, everyone. So just to kind of give further, just a tiny bit of context. So we were initially invited here by the Green Benefit District. So looking a lot with Dogpatch and Northwest Trail Hill. And so over time, it's kind of evolved to sort of the surrounding community as well. But at the core, this is sort of the area that we're looking at. And looking at this area, we wanted to look at the different characteristics, both present and future, that are the strengths, that are weaknesses, that need to be addressed, or that are existingly good. And so some things right now, currently, that are really well at the site is that you have this waterfront, but it's a sheltered waterfront because you're on the interior of the bay, you're not getting those strong ocean swells. As well, you have a really close proximity to downtown, the financial district, business commercials, that sort of thing. But while those things are good, there are some weaknesses. And one of the major ones is the susceptibility to liquefaction of the site. The types of soil, the groundwater, basically combines when you have an earthquake event in this area to liquefy and have the potential to cause a lot of damage to a lot of the area. Another concern for the area is a lot of it is under what is called a mayor zone. That's basically the city saying that there is a suspicion of either contamination of groundwater and or the soil. And so there's a combination of both possible contaminations, the potential to susceptibility to liquefaction, as well as there's a lot of problems with storms in the area. Because these storms are coming how they are in that sort of western, southwestern direction, you get a lot of strong eastern winds that can come across the bay. And when it comes across the bay, it has the potential to have a long fetch, have a long sort of wind velocity that can produce some strong storm surges. And with 50-mile-per-hour winds, you can have up to 6.5 feet of storm surges that will be hitting this waterfront. And so kind of combine it all together to look at what are some areas that are most at risk, most susceptible to a lot of the weaknesses, and how can we move forward knowing this. And so now that we looked at the present, we want to look towards the future with the site. And the future of the site has a lot of promises. There's a lot of people wanting to invest a lot of economic and viability into it, a lot of people wanting to move to the area. There's a lot of love for the community, a lot of want and need for growth for the community and the surrounding areas to become this sort of more green, more new hub to the city. But with that, we had to look into the future threats to the area, which a major one being the sea level rise. And so we have some sections here. On the top, we have Pier 70, which is along the waterfront there. They're planning to do a redevelopment. This is their planned grading at the top, while at the bottom is the existing grade along the waterfront. And so you have 6 feet where the person is right now. That's kind of the lowest point along the waterfront, and 12 feet on the left there, that's your average. So just kind of keep in mind that 12 feet is the average, 6 feet is the lowest point along the waterfront. And so right now, we have mean sea level there. Moving forward, you have your high tides and your high tides. Those are your kind of extreme sort of king tides. And then you have your storm surges from 100-year storming events, as well as we looked at 500-year storm events and what those storm surges would account to. And so right now, this is kind of what we call a total water level. There's sort of some debate between, some documents say between 10 feet, some say 12 feet. But you're looking at right now, at most your water is reaching right up to the edge of the waterfront of this community. And that's not accounting for sea level rise at the moment. And so when we look at sea level rise, we took that total water level at most at 12 feet and looked at how it would react with 100-year storms. And so first, by 2030, you're looking at a 1 foot rise of sea level. By 2050, you're looking at 2 feet rise of sea level. By the end of the century, you're looking at 6.5 feet rise of sea level. So now you're about 6.5 feet above where the current coastline is. By 2200, we stretch it even a century beyond that. You're looking at 24 feet above the mean sea level, so around 12 feet above the current coastline could be inundated by sea level rise. And we did the same thing looking at 500-year storm surges, starting at that 12 feet coastline total water level. And so by 2030, you're looking at around 14 feet above, so 2 feet above the current coastline, up to 3 feet by 2050, 2100, 6.5 feet above that. And so then by 2200, you're looking at a total of 25 feet above the current sea level, which is about 13 feet above the current coastline right now. Which is kind of a scary thought, and plus we also want to look at the potential of tsunamis in the area. While very, very low chance, there is the possibility with, if doomsday happens, you could have up to 3 foot of a wave. And so if doomsday happens in 2200 in this community, you're looking around 28 feet above the current sea level, which would be about, the map here, about 16 feet above the current coastline. So we wanted to take that height and take that into consideration moving forward with this. So that's what we call the coastal flooding, which is only one of the major flooding that can affect this community. Some of the others are riverine flooding, which Colin will really express a little bit later. But looking at how the bay and the flows out of those 2 creeks of the north and south are affecting each other. And another issue is a lot of inland flooding, both from the combined sewer system, the types of storms that you're having here, while looking forward, the more frequency of higher storms with climate change, warming waters, and etc. A lot of the other groups are going to look at that a lot more. And so right now, you have this as being your current conditions. You have, like as you see on the top image, there's a mix of residential and industry here. You have a nice coastline, but there's not much there. You have a little kind of a rock wall there, but there's nothing much that's separating the 2 areas. And that Pier 70 development you saw in the earlier sections, that's where they're kind of developing in that orange box there. And while they're raising up the whole platform by around 4 or 5 feet, not only is that not going to last for maybe it may last by the end of the century, but it won't last by 2200 for one. Plus, it's only covering that small area, not going to help much to the north or to the south of there. This is a look at a NOAA sort of plan view where you can input some numbers and it will show you the amount of flooding that would happen with sea level rise. So we looked at the 2030, 2050, and 2100 numbers of 1 feet, 2 feet, and 6 feet. And the boxes, or these sort of box colored areas, the darker they are represent the amount of population densities in those areas. So you can see by 2100, you're going to have a lot of people being affected by the possible inundation of the sea level rise. So what can we do about it? You have three options for this community. You have either emergency evacuation, when that sea level rises up and you start getting flooding. But the problem with that, as you can see with such things, events like Hurricane Katrina, you have a lot of people that would end up being homeless, that get stuck at stadiums, that become really affected for decades to come. You could also plan for relocation of people, but the problem with that is that San Francisco is really dense at the moment. That when you have 5,000 people that could be affected by this, per se, where are you going to move those 5,000 people? Or the last option is that we explore this idea of living with water, that we adapt to it, that we integrate with it, and sort of build around with it, which is what we're going to really explore throughout the rest of our presentation. And so the main big idea that we're coming up with is this idea of a super levee. And one of the precedents that we took into account and to really inspire us by this were the ones that are being developed in Japan, with the main idea behind that being that Japan has experienced similar flooding events both through river, inland, and coastal, as well as their ideas behind the super levee and the exaggerated slope of it, allowing for the capabilities and resistance of the super levee to earthquakes and to liquefaction, which earthquakes and that sort of idea, as you know, is very prevalent in this area. So we wanted to take that idea and adapt it to the situation here. And to do that, we kind of looked at different parameters for it, looking at a shallow base slope area, looking for the most shallow water so that we don't have to create so much fill for the super levee, and realizing that we need to stay as close as we can to the coastline. And then we also looked at, when we build it, how much disruption can be of place, both at the north and south ends of the community. And another idea that we proposed with the super levee being there is that you could capture water behind the super levee, as Philip's going to explore a lot more, in what we call Potter Park, which was inspired by designs in the Netherlands and Amsterdam, which would allow you to hold water for drought seasons. You could treat water and so forth. And as well with this, we also explored how far you could cut into those soils, such as cutting up to Illinois streets. You can cut out the soil there, turn that community into more amphibious aquatic buildings, and then you could take that soil that was there that was contaminated and treat it. As well as we also looked at, you would cut it into those areas that were prone to liquefaction, turning those communities into more aquatic, amphibious communities, taking out the danger of the liquefaction, as well as treating the soils beneath there. And for the programming for the actual super levee itself, here's one variation that I looked at, was to do the least amount of development onto it, while allowing for the bay sites to be turned into a lot more of an ecological habitat restoration of the natural shoreline. You can have a lot more, as the San Francisco Bay Area had a lot of tidal marshes, allowing for that to be on the exterior. That would also act as a natural storm break, an actual habitat. It would act as a nice recreational piece, and all around be a lot more less industrialized, less urbanized, while also providing the safety that is needed for the sea level rise. Now I'll turn it over to Nathan, who's going to kind of look a little bit on the opposite side of that, and different programming elements that can also be implemented using that super levee.
Hello everyone, my name is Nathan McCammons, and I'm going to talk to you about the urban super levee, which, as you can see here, leaves a lot more room for urban development, new industry, waterfront housing, as well as a lot of green energy generation opportunities. Now, briefly going back and looking at the current site, there's a lot of pier access, but it's not so much primarily for public access as it is for industrial, as it used to be extremely active and isn't so much anymore. There's also a few bay views that look out across the water, which we want to keep in mind to create spaces, to create character on the site without taking away much. Now, some of the weaknesses, again, go back to little public water access. So there's no real beachfront, there's no activity along the water side. Aside from the waterfront and walking along that, there's no way to get down immediately to the water. There's also a few permeable spaces in the site, which is largely due to the bedrock that's so close to the surface, but also due to a lack of green spaces, especially on the southern side. Since it was so industrial, it's almost all concrete. Seen here is another diagram expressing the vulnerability that several parts of the site have to liquefaction. If you don't know what liquefaction is, during an earthquake, when the water solubility or the soil solubility is just the right mixture, it can pretty much turn to the consistency of jello and